The girl was caught red-handed by her father, right after coming back from an all-night party, before she could even explain. The bottom of the entire building was suddenly detonated, flames immediately shot up into the sky all around. Right after that, a second bomb on the upper floors was also set off. The building instantly collapsed from the middle. Residents inside the building had no time to escape at all. The accident eventually claimed the lives of 600 residents, although the girl at the bottom of the building wasn't killed in the explosion. She knew she was going to die soon too, because she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see. Just as the girl fell into despair, a decadent middle-aged man suddenly appeared in front of her. He said in a firm tone that as long as he was around, he would never let the girl face any danger again. The man's name was Creasy, a genuine elite soldier. He served 16 years in the U.S. Army. He took part in countless battles, including the Iraq War, but all of that changed on that day. During a stealth operation, Creasy spotted someone flipping him off on the surveillance footage. Creasy didn't take it seriously at first. After all, these people would all become prisoners in 10 minutes. But the next second, several armed men suddenly rushed into the surveillance frame. They quickly surrounded one of Creasy's teammates. Before Creasy could figure out what was happening, he heard strange noises coming from his own side as well. Creasy quickly drew his pistol and shot dead one of the infiltrating enemies, yet enemies kept pouring in like a tidal wave. After getting hit by a stun grenade, Creasy was completely put at a disadvantage. He could only fight for his life. He barely managed to take down the entire team, at the cost of severe injuries. Creasy already sensed that something was wrong by then. He rushed back to the computer and tried to contact his teammates on the stealth mission, only to find that they had all been captured.
Creasy.
Hey!
To my wife. I love you.
From then on, Creasy suffered from PTSD. He was woken up by that nightmare every single day. Only constant heavy drinking could let him temporarily forget that nightmare from the past. Creasy muddled along like this for 4 years. His good friend Paul couldn't bear to watch his old partner go on like this, so he got him a job. He offered Creasy a position as a bodyguard at his own security company, although Creasy still hadn't gotten over the trauma from that year. He agreed anyway. His only request was for Paul to arrange a job where he could work alone. Later, Paul took Creasy to his home in Rio de Janeiro. He had cooperation with the Brazilian president here. He could help make an introduction later on. But what Creasy was thinking about at this point was something else. He looked at Paul's happy and perfect family. The 3 children had all grown up. At this point, Creasy finally realized that so much time had passed. The next day, Paul took Creasy to a construction site. He told Creasy that this was a key project cooperated with the president. There were rumors that terrorists were planning to attack this place, so Creasy's task was to protect the normal progress of the project. Creasy showed a little hesitation at this point. After all, he hadn't fought for far too long. Then the two went to meet the project supervisor together, who was also the director of the Brazilian security agency. The man just glanced coldly at Creasy and revealed all his past experiences. Although Creasy had an impressive resume in the past, the failure 4 years ago was an indelible stain on him forever. The entire team was wiped out. He himself was also left with PTSD. Therefore, the supervisor immediately said that he would never hire Creasy.
This is not a retirement home for broken soldiers.
But under Paul's constant persuasion, the supervisor decided to give him a favor. The supervisor took out a pistol, claiming that Creasy would be allowed to work here if he could disassemble the gun within the specified time. But Creasy hadn't held a gun for 4 years. As expected, he failed to finish the task. After that, the supervisor tested his reaction ability again. Creasy's performance was equally poor, and he was knocked to the ground easily by the man. Creasy knew he'd embarrassed his old friend, but Paul told him not to care about it.
But it's never a straight line from here to there, right?
Paul told Creasy that he still had other ways out. As long as he could pull himself together, everything would be worthwhile. That night, Creasy drank a lot of alcohol again. His heart was filled with confusion and loss. The drunk Creasy hailed a taxi. On the roadside, the driver saw that he had something on his mind, and took the initiative to talk to Creasy. Only then did he learn that the driver was just as miserable as him. At this point, the two lonely souls unexpectedly had an emotional resonance. For the first time in all these years, Creasy met someone who understood him. Just as he was about to say something, Creasy suddenly saw a cross outside the car window. He seemed to think of something, quickly stopped the driver and stumbled over to the cross. Perhaps seeing that he was alone and dead drunk, several gangsters immediately surrounded Creasy. One of them pulled out a knife and ordered Creasy to hand over all his valuables. At this point, the female driver stepped forward to help him out of trouble, but was instead held hostage by the gangsters. Creasy originally didn't want to get entangled with them, but since they had already threatened an innocent civilian, Creasy could no longer stand idly by. He pretended to hand over his wallet to the gangsters. The moment the man reached out to take it, Creasy suddenly knocked him down with one punch. The rest of the gangsters immediately swarmed forward. Although Creasy's skills had declined, he was still a veteran with 16 years of military service. These ordinary thugs were no match for him at all. After a fierce scuffle, Creasy beat all of them to the ground. If it weren't for the kind female driver stopping him in time, Creasy would probably have beaten them to death. On the other side, Paul's daughter had been out fooling around all night. When she came back, she found her father waiting for her right outside the door. The daughter was instantly filled with embarrassment. Just as she was about to explain to her father, an accident happened suddenly. The sound of the explosion reverberated through the sky. The drowsy Creasy woke up in an instant. He stared at the explosion site with bloodshot eyes. Creasy recognized that it was Paul's residence. He immediately told the driver to head there, but it was already too late. The entire building had been reduced to ruins. Firefighters stopped Creasy and kept him away from the fire scene. The next day, Creasy watched the news report, anger flashing in his eyes. He secretly swore that no matter who the perpetrators were, he would never let them get away. Just then, the director of the security agency took the initiative to find Creasy. After an overnight search, they found Paul's daughter Poe around the building ruins. Besides that, they had identified that a terrorist organization called Revolutionary Front was behind the terrorist attack. Upon hearing that his old friend's daughter was still alive, Creasy hurried to see Poe. Creasy told Poe to rest assured that as long as he was around, no one would hurt her again. Just then, the president of Brazil also arrived at the scene. He hoped Creasy could help them question Poe about what happened at the scene. After all, she was the only surviving eyewitness, but Creasy demanded that the Brazilian government send Poe back to the US immediately. They would only answer questions from the Brazilian side at the US consulate after confirming their safety. Creasy's request was very reasonable. The president readily agreed to send the two back to the US, but the next second, Creasy rejected the president's proposal again. He decided to stay in Brazil to avenge his old friend. At this point, Creasy trusted no one present. He turned down the bodyguards arranged for Poe by the president. He asked the director of the security agency for a pistol. He personally escorted Poe out of the camp. No one realized at this point that a fierce beast that had been asleep for a long time had woken up. Creasy's blatant action was undoubtedly an open provocation to those terrorists, so the terrorist leader immediately looked up. Creasy's information, he found that Creasy was nothing but a good-for-nothing suffering from PTSD. The leader immediately decided to teach Creasy a lesson. Little did he know that this was exactly what Creasy wanted. The next day, Creasy took Poe openly to the airport again. He intended to lure those people out on his own initiative. When the two reached a crossroads, Creasy keenly sensed someone was watching him from the building opposite. In addition, there were people on both sides of the road, constantly staring their way. Creasy knew the enemies had arrived. He quickly chambered around in his pistol and turned the car into an alley. When the terrorists saw Creasy change direction, they immediately sent a mobile unit to block the road ahead, but Creasy turned around and drove straight into a nearby military base. The director of the security agency was waiting inside at this point, and a military helicopter was already on standby. This was Creasy's real destination. The chase along the way made Creasy realize there must be a mole among the security agency director's men. Otherwise, how could the terrorists lay an ambush so accurately on their evacuation route? But in the eyes of the security agency director, Creasy was just a washed-up man who had even forgotten how to use a gun. His speculation was completely worthless. The security agency director kept urging Creasy to make Poe speak up about what she had seen. Poe recalled that when she was heading home, she saw a man in black riding a motorcycle speeding past her. There were two vans following right behind him. They seemed to be chasing the man in black. Creasy asked in detail about the features of the vehicles, but just then, Poe broke down emotionally again. She choked up and couldn't answer a single question. Creasy had to cover her eyes with a cloth strip. Then in a gentle tone, he slowly guided Poe to recall what happened that day. With Creasy's help, Poe managed to recall the model of the white van. She even vaguely remembered the face of the masked motorcyclist. This made both Creasy and the security agency director widen their eyes in shock. But at this point, Poe once again flashed back to the scene of her father being killed in the explosion. The emotions that had finally calmed down collapsed once again. After Creasy left the room, the security chief suggested arranging a sketch artist. He planned to interrogate her, and make a portrait as soon as Po regained her composure, but Creasy believed Po should not be further disturbed in a short time. The top priority was to root out the mole within the team, meanwhile, retrieve the surveillance footage near the crime scene, and track down the suspected vehicle as soon as possible. Although the security chief looked down on Creasy greatly, what he said did make sense. The security chief immediately said he would ask the president to select a special team to handle the situation. Then, as if something crossed his mind, the security chief took the initiative to invite Creasy to join the team.
You know your friend Rayburn said you would see that having something to fight for would bring out the best in you.
Obviously, after getting along during this period, the security chief decided to give Creasy another chance. Soon after, Creasy personally escorted Po onto the plane, yet somehow, Creasy had a bad feeling. He guessed the terrorists would never give up so easily. Just then, Creasy suddenly heard the sound of a car speeding closer. As if realizing something, he immediately shouted for everyone to take cover. The next second, terrorists drove straight into the military base and fired wildly at the surroundings with machine guns. Creasy fought back quickly and killed 2 terrorists on the spot. Seeing the situation turning bad, the remaining 2 drove straight toward the plane, hoping to kill Po quickly to silence her. Creasy immediately chased after them by car. By then 1 terrorist had already boarded the plane. Without hesitation, Creasy leaped and jumped onto the plane. A fierce battle broke out inside the cabin. With his rich combat skills, Creasy barely took down the enemy. But their crisis was far from over. The plane had already accelerated to a very high speed. Meanwhile, another terrorist sabotaged the plane's propeller from the outside. At this critical moment, Creasy had no choice but to fight with all his might. He pulled the plane up with full force and made an emergency landing on a nearby road. This avoided an immediate plane crash and fatalities. Creasy grabbed the knocked out terrorist, hijacked a passing car, and fled the place quickly with Po. At the same time, the female driver was being urged to get married by her mother. She was already tired of hearing such words. Impatience was clearly written all over her face. Just then, Creasy suddenly called her. She was the only person Creasy could trust here. The female driver originally didn't want to get involved in this matter, but she glanced back at her mother, and a bold idea quickly came to her mind.
What if I ask for something that's not money?
After hanging up the phone, the female driver immediately set off to find Creasy. It was a very hidden abandoned factory. The female driver brought Creasy what he needed. She also stated her reward demand. She hoped Creasy could get her a new identity and leave this place forever to start a new life elsewhere. Creasy agreed to her request. He then immediately used the anonymous phone brought by the female driver to urgently contact his old friend at the CIA. He didn't directly ask the man to send people for rescue. At this point, Creasy was unsure how deeply the terrorists' forces had infiltrated. He only asked his CIA friend to prepare a sum of cash for his subsequent evacuation. Apart from that, Creasy didn't reveal any other information to him. After hanging up the phone, Creasy quickly moved the terrorist in the trunk into the female driver's car. Then Creasy and Po followed the female driver back to the slum, looking at the armed men with unfriendly expressions all around. Creasy grew vigilant instinctively. Luckily, Po beside him told him in time that those people were slum gangsters. They would provide protection as long as they were paid. This prevented a misunderstanding. The female driver took the 2 back to her residence. Looking at the narrow and cramped room, Po couldn't help frowning, but Creasy had a completely opposite reaction, because only such slums could stay out of official control, free from the urgency of being hunted down. Po smiled for the first time, yet Creasy still couldn't let his guard down. He now had many questions to ask the bastard in the car. Creasy ran into the female driver, who had just come back with food when he went downstairs. Under her guidance, Creasy took the bastard to a nearby repair shop. Using the tools inside, Creasy easily forced the terrorist to talk. He learned that this man was just a small thug from a local Rio gang. They were actually all hired by someone else. The thug didn't know the man's real name. He only knew that everyone called him Osmar. All the subsequent sniping operations by the thugs were also directed by Osmar behind the scenes. At this point, Creasy's eyes turned terrifyingly cold. He finally caught a clue leading to the mastermind behind everything. Creasy put a knife to the thug's neck and asked for Osmar's whereabouts, but the thug and his companions were only hired hands. They knew nothing specific about Osmar, not even what he looked like clearly. They only vaguely saw a scar on Osmar's face. They contacted each other using specially modified phones. Seeing that the thug was no longer of any use, Creasy slowly plunged the knife into his body. He then sewed a detonator into the wound. As long as Creasy pressed the button, the thug would be blown to pieces instantly. After Creasy went back, he entrusted the female driver to take care of Po while he was away. so the female driver found her husband's cousin Jason to protect Poe during Creasy's absence, but he immediately passed the task of protecting Poe to his thin and young little brother Charlie. He went out with other accomplices to make easy money instead. At first, Poe was very resistant to the boy, but Charlie quickly gained Poe's trust with his fluent English. It turned out that although Charlie lived in the slum, he never gave up studying. This inspiring spirit deeply touched Poe, and when she found out that Charlie had lost his parents just like her, Poe instantly felt a sense of sympathy for someone in the same plight. Charlie invited her to go out to relax. The two came to a bookstore. It was the boy's favorite place. Just then, a group of gang members surrounded the two. The leading man, named Bob, had always been on bad terms with Jason, so he planned to take the opportunity to vent his anger on Charlie. He suddenly took Poe hostage.
Isso aqui é problema pra ti? Porque Alberto acha que tu dá conta, então quero ver.
Charlie begged these gang members to let Poe go, only to draw more ridicule. Charlie instinctively pulled out a pistol to intimidate them, yet it was snatched away in an instant. The strong man didn't harm the boy, but instead gave him a word of advice.
Eu não sou inteligente que nem tu, mas eu acho que se merda é a única pessoa preocupada contigo, ouve esse merda aqui, livro. Se tu não é merda.
On the other side, Creasy went to the beach to meet with a CIA agent from the US. The agent brought him a large bag of cash, as well as intelligence on the revolutionary front. Creasy tried to ask for information about Osmar, but the contact knew nothing about him either. After leaving the beach, Creasy escorted the thug to the gang headquarters. The thug showed the gang leader the fake death photos, prepared in advance by Creasy through the surveillance system. He intended to trick the gang into opening the gate, but the leader was highly vigilant, and told the thug to wait for further contact. At a mobile phone store, Creasy had to activate the backup plan. He circled around, and sneaked into the gang headquarters through the back door. Unexpectedly, the thug chose to resist at this point. Although Creasy shot him dead immediately, his position was exposed as a result. Gang members inside rushed out at once, and launched a full-scale search of the base. Creasy could only take the chance to kill one enemy, and force his way out of the gang hideout. This operation gained nothing and only alerted the enemy. It would inevitably be very difficult to infiltrate again later, yet Creasy still refused to give up. He went to the mobile phone store Osmar had mentioned, and took the designated phone. He prepared to take one last gamble. Just then, Poe suddenly called him. Upon hearing that Poe was in trouble, Creasy hurriedly drove back. But right at this point, Osmar suddenly called him. Creasy intended to bluff, and lure the man out for a head-on fight, yet Osmar had already seen through Creasy's scheme.
We enjoy watching you sit in a little car.
Creasy immediately realized he was being followed. He quickly hung up and took off the phone's back cover. Sure enough, there was a tiny tracker inside, but Creasy didn't throw the phone away right away. He decided to make use of their trap against them. Creasy drove his car to a parking lot. He casually tossed the phone into a trash can. As expected, Osmar soon arrived at the parking lot with his men. After finding the phone Creasy had discarded, Osmar ordered his men to do a brief search. They drove off after confirming there was no danger. Little did they know, Creasy had already hidden himself in the trunk of their car. Just as Creasy's plan was going smoothly, the female driver ran into trouble. It turned out that Creasy had accidentally dropped the female driver's business card when leaving the phone store. The phone shop owner immediately reported the incident to Osmar. Osmar then sent men to kidnap the female driver and force her to reveal the whereabouts of Creasy and Poe. The female driver pretended to give in and led them back to the slum. When the men weren't paying attention, she secretly sent a signal with lights. The gang members spotted the signal and immediately surrounded the car. Seeing the situation turning bad, Osmar's men quickly claimed they meant no harm. They promised to release the female driver as long as Poe was handed over to them. But Creasy was a guest under their protection. If the gang handed Poe over, they would lose all credibility in the slum. Therefore, Bob didn't hesitate to shoot one of the enemies dead on the spot. The other man fled in panic. Unexpectedly, he ran straight into Poe. It turned out that because Creasy hadn't come back for a long time, Poe thought he had abandoned her, so she ran out of the small house. Osmar's men now held Poe and Charlie hostage. The gang members dared not make any reckless moves. Taking this chance, the man immediately reported the situation to Osmar. Meanwhile, Creasy followed Osmar's car all the way to his residence. When night fell and all was quiet, Creasy sneaked into Osmar's son's room. He pretended to be one of Osmar's men, and tricked the boy into leading him to the safe house. Creasy then pressed the alarm. Osmar and his wife fell right into the trap, and hurried into the safe house to hide. In the end, they were both captured by Creasy, who was waiting there. Creasy told Osmar plainly that he was doomed to die today, but he would spare his family if he answered truthfully. Under Creasy's threat, Osmar confessed the whole truth about the bombing. It turned out that he was only acting on someone else's orders. The real mastermind was Ferez, the leader of the Revolutionary Front who was in prison. But when asked about the specific participants, Osmar began to hesitate and hold back. Seeing that he refused to be honest, Creasy cut off one of his fingers on the spot. Osmar immediately gave an honest account of the list of participants. At this point, Creasy noticed that no one on the list was recorded as riding a motorcycle. He concluded that Osmar was still hiding the truth, and threatened him with his son. Even so, Osmar still insisted that he didn't know the masked motorcyclist at all. Looking at his anxious expression, Creasy confirmed that Osmar wasn't lying. His doubts about the mysterious man in black grew even stronger. He refused to believe it was just a mere coincidence. Creasy then asked Osmar about his follow-up action plans, only to learn that he'd already been abandoned by his superiors. After the failed military base operation, all subsequent operations had been handed over to others. The Revolutionary Front adopted a hive-style internal management structure. Osmar only knew his own subordinates, and knew nothing about other branches. Creasy sent all the recorded confessions of the two to his old friend at the CIA. Just then, one of Osmar's men suddenly called him. Upon hearing that Poe had been captured, Creasy suffered another PTSD attack and fainted on the spot. Osmar was overjoyed, and immediately told his son to move to the gate. As long as the door release button was pressed, his men outside would rush in and cut Creasy to pieces. At this critical moment, Creasy woke up just in time. He managed to stop the boy, but since he had fallen into a coma, the gang couldn't get in touch with Creasy. They had to act on their own, and attempt a long-range sniper shot at Osmar's men. But Bob's marksmanship was very poor. He not only missed the enemy twice in a row, but also accidentally wounded Charlie. Osmar's men flew into a rage at once, and threatened to kill Poe and the other boy. Creasy immediately proposed exchanging Osmar's family for Poe and Charlie. The two sides agreed to meet at a desert beach. At this point, Poe was filled with deep regret. If she hadn't distrusted Creasy, she would never have let her father's killer escape with her own hands. But Creasy didn't blame her. After all, he already knew Osmar's identity. There was no way they could run away anymore. On the other side, Henry, an old friend at the CIA, immediately reported all the information sent by Creasy to his superior. The superior greatly admired Creasy's capability. He had single-handedly solved a major case that the Brazilian government couldn't crack in just 3 days. He immediately ordered his men to pass the news to the Brazilian government. Just a few hours later, all terrorists involved in the operation were arrested. Those who put up stubborn resistance were shot dead on the spot. Everything seemed to have settled down, but Creasy still felt uneasy in his heart. The mysterious motorcyclist in black hadn't yet been identified. According to his deduction, that man was most likely sent by the leader of the Revolutionary Front to keep a close watch on Osmar, and Poe was the only person who could recognize him. Therefore, Creasy inferred that the Revolutionary Front would still target Poe, but he never expected the danger would come from someone close to him. Meanwhile, distrusting the capability of the Brazilian government, Creasy decided to use his personal connections. He asked an old friend named Ivan to help arrange for Poe and the others to leave the country. To cover their tracks, Creasy booked rooms at 10 different hotels using his real identity. Then he reserved rooms at another 10 hotels under a false identity. He lied to the front desk that he was helping domestic violence victims, and asked them to contact him at once if anyone came looking for him. And this was only the first step of Creasy's plan. He then entrusted Ivan with helping him take the leader of the Revolutionary Front out of prison. An ordinary person would definitely think Creasy had gone crazy upon hearing such a request, but Ivan knew his strength very well and readily agreed. That same night, Creasy received a call from the hotel front desk. He knew the enemy had made their move. Creasy immediately arranged for Poe and the others to relocate. He chose to show himself on his own. As expected, Creasy was targeted by 2 men. As soon as he arrived at the hotel, Creasy was about to turn their scheme against them, when he suddenly received another call. Someone was also asking for him at another hotel. He found out it was Henry. Creasy's expression turned complicated at once. He couldn't figure out what Henry was doing here at this point. After thinking it over, Creasy still decided to contact Henry with an anonymous mobile phone. Out of caution, Creasy talked with Henry for less than a minute. Even so, Henry still managed to lock onto his location. After returning to the residence, Creasy immediately arranged for Poe and the others to relocate again, only to find Bob was also there unexpectedly. Creasy wanted to drive him away. Luckily, the female driver stepped forward to stop him in a hurry. It turned out that Bob had come to help them. Not long ago, their boss settled the bonus for this mission. Due to Charlie's failure to provide proper protection, part of Jason's reward was given to Bob. the profit-driven Jason immediately beat Charlie up. Even Bob couldn't stand it anymore, and took the initiative to pay money to help Charlie out of trouble. Bob had always disliked Jason, precisely because he was overly greedy for money. To help Charlie break free from Jason's control, he offered to lend a hand voluntarily. Bob had once helped his boss smuggle drugs into the prison. Now that Creasy was planning a prison break, he exactly needed Bob's connections. In return, Creasy would take Charlie away with them afterward. Charlie couldn't understand why Bob was helping him so much. It was then that Bob told him he once had a little sister who was just like Charlie. Back then, Bob was also only after money, but only after losing her did he come to understand and regret it. The reason he had deliberately humiliated Charlie before was to make him realize he didn't belong in the slum, yet Charlie still hadn't understood his hidden meaning. While Creasy was making intense preparations, Henry had already tracked down the place where he made the call yesterday. He used his official identity to pull up the hotel surveillance footage, and successfully traced Creasy's whereabouts. Upon receiving the news, Creasy immediately led everyone to evacuate, but when they reached the underground parking lot, Poe suddenly remembered she'd left her father's keepsake coin in the room. Creasy had no choice but to take her back to get it. They escaped from the building by elevator. At the very last moment before Henry caught up, the group took refuge in Ivan's manor in Brazil, and discussed the specific plan for the upcoming prison break. On the other side, Bob took Jason by surprise, and stole the cash hidden in his secret compartment, as Charlie's living expenses for the future.
O Beto vai surtar com isso.
O Beto já é surtado. Pelo menos agora ele vai estar investindo no irmão de verdade.
Compared with Jason, who shared the same blood, Bob was more like Charlie's real elder brother. Meanwhile, by checking the surveillance again, Henry found that he had almost run into Creasy, but he didn't feel disappointed, because from the surveillance, he noticed Creasy was holding a set of prison staff uniforms. Henry immediately guessed Creasy's next move. He called the prison at once, and ordered them to lock down the entire facility. By this time, Creasy and Bob had already arrived outside the prison. Bob used his connections to help Creasy sneak inside. The next second, the prison alarm went off. The entire prison was placed under full lockdown. Armed prison guards searched every corner carefully. At this point, Creasy had no way back. He had to carry out the plan reluctantly. While pretending to tie his shoelaces, Creasy secretly attached a detonator to the cell door. As he pressed the detonator, countless prisoners escaped from their cells. Prison guards rushed to chase the fugitives one after another. The scene instantly fell into chaos. Taking advantage of the chaos, Creasy headed to the cell of the leader Ferez. Creasy quickly subdued him and put him into a trolley. Then he calmly took Ferez to a hidden corner, right in front of all the prison guards. Creasy knew it was unrealistic to take him out of the prison, so he decided to interrogate him right here. At first, Ferez tried to stay stubborn and uncooperative, but after Creasy's harsh interrogation, Ferez finally began to talk.
You want to know who else I was working with? The name is John Creasy.
Creasy froze on the spot. It turned out that Ferez was nothing but a puppet in someone else's hands, and that person was exactly the president of Brazil. The president threatened Ferez's family, and forced him to carry out the explosion. In addition, they made him forge emails to prove that Creasy was an undercover agent of the Revolutionary Front. Ferez told Creasy that their Revolutionary Front only opposed the president, and never targeted ordinary civilians. Now Creasy's prison break had played right into the mastermind's scheme. Creasy couldn't accept such a truth. Ferez told him to think carefully about who benefited the most from everything that had happened. It was none other than the president of Brazil. But there was one thing Creasy couldn't understand. Now that the president had already suppressed the Revolutionary Front, why would he still target him? Yet Ferez saw this matter very clearly.
They wanted total control. And for that, they needed emergency powers. So they created an emergency.
Right after that, Ferez said he had evidence that could prove the president was the mastermind behind everything. Besides, he also knew that a CIA agent named Henry was involved in the whole incident. The evidence was hidden in the vault of a certain bank. As long as Creasy allowed him to make a phone call to tell his men to rescue his family, he would hand over the evidence to Creasy. Creasy became very emotional upon hearing that his old friend was also involved. He couldn't believe that one old friend had killed another, but Ferez told him that the masked motorcyclist in black was Henry himself. Their original target of the explosion wasn't the apartment where Paul lived, but when Henry saw Creasy staying with Paul, he thought the two working together would likely expose his true identity, so he temporarily changed the plan and attacked Paul's apartment building. By this time, the outside world was in an uproar. Creasy was labeled by the Brazilian government as the mastermind behind the terrorist bombing. A global manhunt had been issued for him. For a moment, all kinds of Forces began to stir and make moves. The profit-driven Jason had his greedy thoughts clearly written all over his face. When he saw the huge reward offered by the Brazilian government, Poe begged Ivan to save Creasy. Although Ivan originally didn't want to get involved in such complicated matters, no one else could save Creasy except him at this point. In the end, he agreed to help. But if Poe and the others didn't want to live in constant fear afterward, they had to find a way to clear Creasy's name. Just then, Creasy suddenly made a phone call. Although Ferris spoke with certainty, Creasy still couldn't believe his comrade of many years would do such a thing. So he mixed Henry's photo with a large number of irrelevant photos, and asked Poe outside to pick it out. The moment Poe pointed out Henry's photo, Creasy's heart turned completely cold. Almost at the same time, the director of the security agency also arrived at the prison. He dispatched heavy troops to search every corner of the prison. He vowed to find Creasy, even if he had to dig the ground 3 feet deep.
E quando a gente achar?
Mata todo mundo. Quem tiver ajudando também.
The next second, Ivan and the others came to break him out in an armed helicopter. The guards rushed one after another to chase Ivan, but this was nothing but a diversion. The female driver and the others disguised themselves as an explosive ordnance disposal team, and took the chance to sneak into the prison. They used their thick helmets to get Creasy out smoothly, yet at the very last moment, Ferris suddenly stopped. He confessed to Creasy that he actually had no evidence at all. It was just a lie made up to get a phone call. Moreover, once he left, the president would definitely harm his family, so he had to stay here, to buy time for his men to rescue his family. Although Creasy could understand Ferris's choice, he still couldn't suppress the anger in his heart. But at this point, he had no other choice. The group left Ferris behind and fled the prison quickly. Although Creasy managed to escape, he felt no joy at all. Clearing his name and bringing down the president was easier said than done. Just then, Creasy suddenly thought of something. He quickly gathered Ivan and the others, and said he had a plan to take down the president, and the key to this plan was Henry. Having known Henry for so many years, Creasy knew Henry was a very cautious man, who had committed countless shady deeds. To avoid being held accountable afterward, Henry had set up a mutual destruction protocol. If he died, all the dark secrets in his possession would be fully released to the public. Working with someone like the Brazilian president, Henry must have kept evidence of his crimes. Therefore, they only needed to find a chance to eliminate Henry, and the president's conspiracy would be exposed to the whole world. But it was easier said than done. Since Henry was so important, the president must have arranged heavy security around him. The group had no chance to make a move at all. At this point, Creasy suggested using himself as bait. He actually planned to turn himself in voluntarily. Based on his understanding of Henry, the man would definitely interrogate him in person. As long as the two were alone in a room, Creasy was confident that he could take him down. But in doing so, Creasy would also lose his life. Everyone strongly opposed the idea, yet Creasy believed sacrificing himself to guarantee everyone's safety was a worthwhile deal. Moreover, he'd long been tormented by past nightmares. He'd already had enough of this kind of life. It would actually be a good thing to find relief in this way. The female driver told him to calm down and think more about Poe. After calming down, Creasy came up with another plan. Although they had no real evidence in their hands, they could perfectly pretend that they did have evidence, and lure Henry and the others into exposing themselves. He first arranged for the female driver to go to a certain bank and deposit a tape. After that, Creasy and the others went to a private residence and disguised the scene to look like a home invasion robbery. The false clues they left behind would lure Henry and his men to the bank. At this point, Creasy noticed he'd forgotten the key prop, a chainsaw. He had to go downstairs to get it, and was accidentally spotted by an elderly neighbor next door. The old man recognized him at once as the wanted criminal on television, so right after Creasy left, the old man immediately called the police. When Creasy and the others heard the wailing police sirens downstairs, they abandoned the scene disguise and hurried to the underground garage to evacuate, but they were still a step too late. Ivan was grazed in the arm by a bullet. Creasy suffered another PTSD attack. He told Ivan and the others to leave quickly, while he found a way to escape later. Just then, Bob suddenly jumped out of the car. He actually planned to sacrifice his life to deliver the false clue. After reuniting with the group, Creasy couldn't help but berate Bob for being foolish, but they had no other choice now. To cooperate with Bob's plan, Creasy took the initiative to call the president, saying that he would expose all his crimes to the public soon. On the other side, upon learning that they had captured one of Creasy's accomplices, Henry volunteered to interrogate Bob. Bob lied and said he was only a hired thief, knowing nothing about his employer's identity or intentions.
Me pagaram pra estourar cofre.
Que tinha no cofre?
Tinha só uma chave.
Combined with a threatening call the president had received earlier, the security chief immediately guessed it must be a backup plan left by Perez. At this point, Henry and the security chief immediately sent heavy troops to surround the bank vault. Sure enough, they found a tape inside. Henry checked the content on the spot, but there was no evidence at all, only Creasy's ridicule.
I'm afraid that if you're still listening to this part of the recording, that you've already released the toxins that will kill you.
At this point, Henry really felt some discomfort in his respiratory tract. He quickly had himself sent to the hospital. Little did he know that this was exactly what Creasy wanted. In fact, there was only a small amount of chemical agent on the tape that would cause a burning sensation in the respiratory tract. It couldn't cause any fatal harm at all. By then, Creasy and his accomplices had already laid an ambush at the hospital, waiting for Henry to walk right into the trap. The female driver keeping watch outside spotted Henry's arrival, and immediately alerted their accomplices inside. Following the plan, Poe took off her disguise in public and revealed her identity. All the guards were drawn to her. She then jumped into a trash bin prepared by Ivan, and easily avoided the guards' search. By now Henry had realized he'd been fooled by Creasy. There was no virus on the tape at all. He immediately ordered the entire building to be locked down. He had no idea Creasy had quietly come up behind him. Just as he was about to make his move, the security chief saw through Creasy's disguise. The two immediately got into a fierce fistfight. Meanwhile, Henry was escorted away in a hurry. Creasy had no intention of wasting time on him. He seized the chance and quickly locked the security chief inside the room. He then continued to chase after Henry. The two men met at a corner. Henry was no match for Creasy at all, but with bodyguards present, Creasy couldn't kill Henry either. Yet Henry didn't order his guards to kill Creasy. Instead, he wanted a fair one-on-one duel with him. If possible, he hoped to recruit Creasy to his side. He put forward a very tempting offer. As long as Creasy agreed to serve him, he could take Poe and the others away safely, but Henry only got a fist in response. At the same time, Poe and the others ran straight into the enemies. Outnumbered and outgunned, they could only defend passively. Poe's shouts reached Creasy's ears. His PTSD flared up once again. Henry took the opportunity to wrap a rope around Creasy's neck. In the chaos, Creasy felt for a surgical scalpel. He stabbed it backward into the artery in Henry's thigh. Blood gushed out instantly. By the time the security chief arrived, Henry had already lost his life completely. Creasy was also nowhere to be found. On the first floor of the hospital, the enemies surrounded Poe and the others. Just as everyone fell into despair, Creasy suddenly charged out from a corner. He wiped out all the enemies with a single incendiary grenade. He escorted Poe to evacuate from the scene. Unexpectedly, they were blocked by the security chief halfway. He took Poe hostage. Now that Henry was dead, the chief knew that both he and the president were doomed. Creasy dared not provoke him, so he had to lay down his weapons as the chief ordered. Creasy took the chance to signal Poe with his eyes. Poe immediately got the message, and slammed her fist into the security chief's abdomen. Creasy moved in swiftly and disarmed the chief. With his superb fighting skills, Creasy completely overpowered the chief. Finally, he shot him dead. Not long after, the crimes of the president and Henry were exposed. Creasy went from a wanted man to a civilian hero overnight. The female driver also left the slum with her daughter, living the life she had always dreamed of. Charlie and Bob became Ivan's subordinates. Poe returned to the U.S. and held a funeral for her father. All the emotion she had bottled up for so long finally erupted, but when she met Creasy's eyes, she felt an overwhelming surge of strength. She knew someone had been silently protecting her all along. Just then, the CIA director called Creasy out of the blue. He greatly admired Creasy's skills, and wanted to recruit him into the CIA, offering an irresistible incentive. It would allow him to avenge his former comrades. The film ends here. Man on Fire premiered this April. The TV series lacks the atmosphere and sense of destiny of the film. It follows the standard formula of a satisfying revenge drama. Its strengths and weaknesses are straightforward. The leading man, a retired special forces soldier, is a likable character. Tormented by PTSD, he's dejected and lonely. The mutual redemption story with the young girl is the only highlight of the series. The action scenes are realistic, with unflashy yet crisp fights. Supporting characters are all plot devices, heavily stereotyped. The plot is cliched and the pace is slow. Some parts of the logic don't hold up to scrutiny. The villains have weak motivations. The ending feels somewhat rushed. If you don't overanalyze the plot, it works well as an action flick. If you like my channel, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe.